San Francisco, May 1903. A gentleman's club. The kind of place that smells like expensive cigars and old money. Heavy leather chairs, dark wood paneling. The sound of billiard balls and quiet, confident conversation. A group of wealthy men are debating the future of the automobile. The general consensus in that room, as in most rooms in 1903, is that these ridiculous horseless carriages are a novelty, an expensive toy for the eccentric, certainly not a serious mode of transportation, certainly not capable of anything beyond the occasional short journey. One man says flatly that no automobile could possibly cross the American continent. The roads aren't there, the fuel supply isn't there, the machines aren't reliable enough. The wilderness between California and New York would swallow any attempt whole. Everyone nods. Everyone agrees. And then a man named Horatio Nelson Jackson sets down his glass. He says, "I'll do it. $50 says I can drive from San Francisco to New York." The room goes quiet for a moment. And then everyone laughs. Because here is what that room knows about Horatio Nelson Jackson. He has never driven a car in his life. He does not own a car. He has never serviced a car or repaired a car or spent any meaningful time around cars. He is, by profession, a doctor. And he just bet $50 that he could do something no one in history has ever done. In a machine he cannot operate, on roads that largely do not exist. The room continues laughing, and Horatio Nelson Jackson walks out the door. Let me give you the context for how insane this was. In 1903, there are approximately 150 miles of paved road in the entire United States. 150 miles. The rest, the thousands of miles between California and New York, is dirt. Some of it is well-packed dirt that functions reasonably well in dry conditions. Much of it is mud in the rain and dust clouds in the sun. Some of it is barely a track through wilderness. Automobiles exist. There are perhaps a few thousand of them in the whole country. Most of them have never been driven more than a few miles from where they were purchased. They break down constantly. They require constant maintenance. Spare parts, when something fails, must be ordered from the manufacturer and can take weeks to arrive. There are no gas stations. Fuel is purchased from pharmacies and general stores in cities and towns, assuming you can find a city or town. There are no road maps, because roads, in any meaningful sense, don't exist. Crossing America by automobile in 1903 is not an adventure. It is an act of optimism so extreme it borders on delusion. Horatio Jackson commits to it before he figures out how to drive. He walks out of the club and immediately buys a used Winton automobile. 2 cylinders, 20 horsepower, open to the elements on all sides because there is no roof and no doors. He names it Vermont for reasons that are never fully explained. He hires a young mechanic named Sewell Croker to come along. Sewell is 22 years old and will spend the next 2 months questioning every decision he has ever made. They load the Vermont with everything they think they might need: sleeping bags, a hand-cranked winch for when the car gets stuck, axes, extra fuel cans, rope. Enough optimism to fill several fuel cans of its own. On May 23, 1903, they point the Vermont east and drive into what is, technically speaking, a complete mystery. The first few days establish the pattern that will define the next 2 months. The roads, where roads exist, are brutal. The Vermont sinks into mud up to its axles with regularity, requiring the winch and considerable profanity to extract. Springs snap. Valves fail. In Nevada, the steering mechanism develops a fault that requires them to stop and wait 4 days for a replacement part to arrive from the Winton factory in Ohio. 4 days in the Nevada desert, waiting for a package from Ohio. Jackson, by all accounts, spends the time cheerfully. He is not a man who experiences adversity the way other people experience adversity. They cross Nevada. They enter Idaho. And somewhere in the high desert of Idaho, on a particularly desolate stretch of road that barely deserves the name, the story becomes something different. They are driving through a landscape of rock and sage and endless sky when they see him. A dog, sitting on the side of the road, scrawny, dusty, wearing the specific expression of an animal that has been through some things and is not entirely sure what happens next. Jackson stops the car. He cannot explain later why he stops. He just cannot drive past a dog that looks like that. They give the dog water. The dog drinks. The dog looks at the car. The dog gets in. They name him Bud. Bud immediately takes up his position on the front seat of the Vermont and begins staring intently at the road ahead. He has, apparently, decided that navigating is his job now. The problem is the dust. The roads of 1903 America kick up clouds of fine dust that coat everything within range. Bud, sitting upright on the front seat, is within range of everything. He spends his first few hours squinting, sneezing, and looking personally offended by the American West. So Jackson stops at a pharmacy in the next town and buys Bud a pair of goggles. Human driving goggles, sized for a person but fitted, somehow, onto a dog. I want you to really picture this. Across the vast American wilderness, through the sage flats of Idaho, through the mountains of Wyoming, through the plains of Nebraska and Iowa, a sputtering, groaning, improbable machine rumbles forward. 2 exhausted, dust-covered men. And on the front seat, wearing aviator goggles, ears back in the wind, scanning the horizon with complete authority, a dog. Bud turns out to be an excellent companion for this journey. He learns to brace himself on curves. He develops a bark for potholes that Jackson learns to interpret as a warning. He sits through breakdowns with patient dignity. Jackson later says, without apparent irony, that Bud was essential to the success of the expedition. 63 days after leaving San Francisco, on July 26, 1903, a battered, dust-encrusted, deeply improbable Winton automobile rolls into New York City. Crowds have gathered. Newspapers have been following the journey. People cheer. Horatio Nelson Jackson has driven an automobile across America for the first time in history. He has proven that it can be done. He collects his $50. He has spent somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000 to win them. By any rational financial analysis, this is one of the worst trades in American history. He spent more than 100 times the prize money to win the prize. Jackson doesn't seem bothered by this. Here's what I think about when I think about this story. Every single person in that San Francisco club knew the bet was insane. They knew the roads didn't exist. They knew the cars weren't reliable. They knew it couldn't be done. And they were, in a narrow sense, right about all of those things. The roads were terrible. The car did break down constantly. The journey was harder than anything anyone had planned for. But Jackson did something before he knew any of that. He said yes. Before he knew how. Before he had a plan. Before he had a car, or a route, or any real idea of what he was agreeing to. He said yes first. And then he figured it out. And in 63 days, he did something that everyone in that room had been certain was impossible. Bud, the dog, retired to the Jackson household in Burlington, Vermont, where he lived out the rest of his days in considerable comfort. He became, briefly, the most famous dog in America. Sometimes the most irrational decision is also the most correct one. You just have to be willing to say yes before you know the answer. Hit like if this made you want to do something stupid. Subscribe. 3 days, next story. See you then.